and then read the Avasthatraya shlokas. I think there are about 4 of them, and then we'll get started.
Vasudevendra Yogindram
Vasudevendra Yogindram
Natva Jnana Pradam Gurum
Natva Jnanapradam Gurum
Mumukshunam Hitarthaya
Mumukshunam Hitarthaya
Tattva Bodho Vidhiyate.
Tattva Bodho Vidhiyate.
Avastatrayam Kim
Avastatrayam
Kim
Jagrat Swapna Shushupti Avastaha
Jagrati Swapna
Sushupti Avastaha
Jagrat Avastha ka
Jagrati
Avastha ka
Shrotradi Jnanendriyaihi
Shotradi Jnanendriyahi
Shabdadi Vishayai cha
Shabdadi Vishaye cha
Jayate iti yat sa Jagradavastya
Jayate iti ya Jagradavastha
Jagratavastha
Stula Sharirabhimani
Stula
Sharirabhimani
Atma Vishwa iti uchate.
Atma
Vishwa iti uchate.
Swapnavastya keti chet
Swapnavastya keti chet
Jagradavastyayam
Jagradavasthayam
yad drishtam yad shrutam
Yadrishtam Yadshrutam
tad janita vasanaya
Janita
Vasanaya. Okay.
Nidra samaye yap prapancha pratiyate
Pratiyate.
sa swapnavastya
Swapnavastha
sukshma sharirabhimani
Sukshma Sharirabhimani
atma taijasa iti uchate.
Atma
Taijasa iti uchate.
At sushuptavastya ka
Ata Sushupti Avastha
ka
aham kimapi na janami
Aham
kimapi na janami
sukena maya
Maya
nidra anubhuyate
Nidra
anubhuyate
iti sushuptavastya
Iti
iti
Sushupti
Sushuptavastha
karana sharirabhimani
Karana
Sharirabhimani
atma pragya iti uchate.
Atma
Prajna iti uchate.
So Hari Om everybody. We are still trying to find out what is the real I and what is Atma, right? And so we are going through all the things that are not Atma. We went through the 3 Shariras, we went through the 3 Avasthas. And then towards the end of the class, we did a little bit of vichara as to why we think none of these are Atma, because what we have said is the Atma is the real I that stands the test of time. It is there in the past, it's there now, and it is there in the future. If any one of these things we can kind of make a conclusion that they did not exist at a certain point of time, then we can conclude that it is not Atma, because Atma is 24/7. That's kind of the way we defined it. And we looked at the 3 avasthas, and we said these 3 avasthas, first of all, they don't come at the same time. They all come individually. Second, they come and go. They don't stay together. You are in Jagrat, then you go into Swapna, and then you go into Sushupti, or vice versa. Depending on, you can go Jagrat to Sushupti and then get to Swapna before you wake up. So there has to be somebody, because when you are involved in the change, you cannot really figure out what the change that is taking place. Just like you have to stand in the station to see the train is moving. If you're in the train, a lot of times you don't really know whether you're moving or you're still stationary if there's another train going in the same, another track. Similarly, there has to be something that is constant for you to detect the change. And we all have already seen that there is change because these three things come and go. So none of these avasthas could be the real I because we have said the real I stands the test of time. And therefore we conclude that there is something which is other than the three shariras, the three avasthas, which is the real I, and we call it the Atma. We don't know what the qualities of the Atman is. We'll come back and we'll read it as we go forward, but think of it that it is an entity that's beyond the shariras, that is beyond the avasthas. That's what we need to know today. One thing I want you to kind of go back is, I think in the second shloka when he talks about it, he said, Avasthatraya Sakshi. I think it's page number 30, line 6 there. The witness of the three states of consciousness. That is Atma. He defines that as the witness of the three states of consciousness. And one more thing that we saw, and it is there in each of the definition of the avasthas, is that you have to identify with one of the shariras to be in that avastha. So when we identify all the way up to the stula sharira, the entire body as I, then we are in the Jagrat avastha. When we do not identify with the gross body and we identify with the Sukshma sharira, we are in the dream state. And then when we identify with the Karana sharira, we are in the deep sleep state or Sushupti avastha. So another way to kind of do the vichara is that throughout the day, we identify with one sharira, we get out of that sharira. We identify with another sharira, we get out of that sharira. If the sharira was an integral part of my body or an integral part of me, I cannot discard something and take it back. If it's a t-shirt, I can throw it out and then I can pick it up because it's not an integral part of me. Or if it's a watch, there are people who wear watches 24/7, but still sometimes they forget the watch when they're going for a bath or something like that. Hand is an integral part of my body. I can never forget my hand in some place and come to my meeting or come to the office because hand is part of me, right? Whereas that is another way of looking at it and say, the shariras are not part of me because I leave the shariras and I come back to another sharira, right? See, the whole Vedanta is built on tarka or logic, right? We don't go and just kind of make a conclusion. We look at the conclusion and we try to hit it with multiple. That is what we do in Upanishads and advanced texts. Here we are just kind of presenting you the conclusion, but to reach the conclusion, there is a lot of shlokas involved. There is a Purva Pakshi who is actually arguing all the questions that we have, and he kind of takes on a different connotation of what is said in the mantra. So it has been argued in multiple sites, and then the Guru explains, and we go through it. So that's why I said in Vedanta, we do not stop questioning. You're free to question anything that's available, but don't go with blind thought, go with logic. So based on those things, we realize that there is some other entity that's beyond the shariras and beyond the avasthas, that is the Atman. What that is given in line 6 on page 30th. It's the Avasthatraya Sakshi. So it is the witness to the three avasthas. And I think that's a very important concept that we need to remember. This is actually the key to moksha, and a lot of us don't pay attention to it. So we also studied, when we looked at each of the avasthas, that the Atma takes on a new role. So when the Atma is identified with the Stula Sharira, we call that role as Vishwam. When the Atman is identified with the Sukshma Sharira, we call that as Taijasa. And when the Atman is identified with the Sukshma Sharira, we called it Pragya. Each one of them is a different role of Atma. Just like we in our life, during the time when we are at home, we are a father, or we are a husband or a wife, or we are son to someone else. Then when we go to the office, we are the same person, but we become an employee, right? We take on a completely different role. So the human being has multiple roles, but each of the role is not the human being. The human being is kind of, the role is the body that takes on individual roles. The reason I'm emphasizing this is I'm going to make a very important statement that you need to pay attention to. The problems in the world that we see every day is not with the human being, it's with the role that we play. So when you wake up in the morning, and if you have a problem in the office, you're identifying with your employee role, and that's why you wake up with anger or headache or whatever that is. If your problem is within somebody in the family, you take on that role. Maybe your wife did not cook the right food when you came from work, and you were upset, and you went to bed angry, and when you woke up, you see her next to you, then immediately you remember what happened last night. You get into the role of the husband. That is the problem. The problem is not with the human that you are in. The problem is with the role that you're playing. And that is very important to understand. When we become the karta or the bhokta of an action, when we become the doer or the enjoyer of the action, we suffer both pleasure and pain. It's a very important concept to understand. The critical thing here is that it is not the Atman that is performing the action. It's the Atman combined with the Sthula Sharira acts in the Jagrat Avastha. Okay, so the Atman alone cannot enjoy the actions and the benefits of the world. Atman has to take on a role of a Sthula Sharira, take on a role of a body before it can enjoy the world. It has to take on the identification with the Sukshma Sharira before it can enjoy the dream. The reason this is very important is in real life, right? A lot of times when we think of a witness, I'm sure you might have seen a movie called Witness. It came in the 80s, I think, or somewhere in the 90s. A witness is never accused of a crime. Actually, the witness is given protection when the crime occurs, because a witness is not involved in the crime. He or she has seen the crime, but they're not involved in the crime, and they have not really participated in the crime. Actually, the person who can really tell you what happened in the incident is the murderer or the alleged murderer, because he was involved in the accident or is involved in the incident. But the witness is not involved in the incident, but he is given protection, and he comes and tells you in the court whatever happened, and then he's given a lot of credibility. The reason I bring that up, the word witness, because we know what witness is in our real life. Atman is exactly the same. Atman is not involved in the action. Atman is the witness to what is happening. In fact, Swamiji used to tell us all the time, and I'll just throw this thing at you. The greatest opera, soap opera in the world is our life. If we watch our life as a witness and just kind of don't get involved in it, but just look at what is going on, we will not be in samsara. The activities will not affect you because you are just the witness to the activity. Now, there is a difference there. Just being the witness to the activity does not mean you should not do the activity to your respect, but do it as if you are doing it somebody else's work, right? You're just a servant of God or whatever, and you're doing the work. And that way you remove the karta bhavam from any activity that you do. See, the problem that we have is that we become extremely identified with the action and the ego is involved in the action. So we tell our child, I said so, so you better listen to me, right? And this is the common emotional attachment we do. I fed you when you were young, and how many nights I've woken up and made tea for you when you were studying an exam. Now I'm asking you to marry the girl that I want, and you're not doing it. So you put an emotional attachment. This is I'm not saying you all are doing it, but we have seen this thing in the movie, right? So we take our ego. What happens is our ego actually goes even beyond the Sukshma Sharira. Sorry, Stula Sharira. Our ego goes to our thoughts. Our ego goes to our children. Our ego goes to our family. Like, remember in movie dialogue, they'll say, if you say anything about my mother, I'll get really angry, because you've taken the ego far beyond your body and put it with your children or put it with your mother. So in fact, they say the fourth avastha is your progeny most of the time, because you have identification with the three shariras, and you also have a major identification with your children, because they become part of you. And if somebody says anything about your child, it really affects you. You get very angry, and because you have that emotional attachment, your ego has gone in that direction. But anyway, coming back to the question that I was telling you, so understand what Atman is. Atman is none of the three shariras or the three avasthas. We just looked through the vicharam, but it is the sakshi. So let me stop there. I've thrown a lot of things at you, and see if something doesn't make sense to you, or if something that is confusing here.
General question, sir. The example that you gave, right? Forget about I am doing, right? I mean, even disciplining children. So if you say that, okay, I fed you, or emotionally you blackmail them, that's not good. So how do you say other way around, like without identifying myself?
No, see, I am not saying you should not discipline children. Don't misunderstand this thing that way.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
When you're playing that role, you do whatever the role demands, right? Because you are the trustee of the child, and the child at that particular point in time does not know what is right, what is wrong. So you do the work as if you're disciplining. You don't get involved and say, I said so, but you need to say, these are the things I need to teach my child so that he or she can survive in the real world. And I'm doing this activity because God is interested. That's what Swami Chinmayananda used to constantly drill into her head. A child, you're a trustee of the child that you have. So you take care of the child from the time they're born till they're about 16 or 18, till they make their own decisions. After that, the child is an individual being. He or she has their own Sukshma Sharira, own Stula Sharira, and own Karana Sharira, which is caused of the vasanas that have taken place. God will take care of them. God has a particular plan for each of the human being, each of the children that he has in this world. But the thing that you should not do is neglect the child when you have to really condition it, right? You have to feed the child. You have to make sure they give them the best capabilities to take the skills. But what we do is we use that, expect something from the child, because we say, I've done this thing, so you have to repay me back. No, I am doing this because God has entrusted me with this responsibility. I'm going to do the responsibility to the best of my ability. And that's it. What the child does after that, if he or she does not do what I want, like I think I might have told this, I don't know whether I told this in this class or some other class. We have a lot of summer interns who come in, right? It was 2 years ago, not prior to COVID, we had a summer intern. This guy is an MBA from MIT, whom we hired, and he was part of my team. So the entire summer he worked with me. And I was very impressed with the kid. He was an Indian origin kid, and he was brilliant. He was able to pick up the concepts very well, and he was grasping a lot of things. And I had actually recommended that we give him a final offer. And towards the end of the summer, when everything is over, I just took him out to lunch, thanking him for what he did. And over time, I'd gotten to know him very well. So as a matter of fact, I just kind of remarked to him that your parents ought to be very proud because you've done so well at such a young age. And it appears that you're also going to be gainfully employed as soon as you come out of your college. And he revealed something that shocked me. He said, sir, you will not believe it. My parents don't like me. They are very upset with the career that I've chosen. They're all a bunch of doctors. I'm the only guy who's doing an MBA. And they were very upset that I didn't follow the family tradition of going into medicine. And I was just totally shocked. This guy is so good, so brilliant in doing what he's doing, but he's not getting the recognition from his parents because the parents had. This is what I was trying to say, is that let the child do whatever he or she is doing. Because if you raise the child well, you give him all the qualities that are required, you treat him, you educate him in our culture, you have done your job. And just like us, we all made mistakes and we have all turned out to be okay, right? These children are grown up in a much more much better atmosphere. They've got a lot more comfort than at least what I did in my life. Why do you think they will not succeed? Have that level of confidence that you've done everything, you've taught them everything, you've given them the basic qualities. And the critical thing that we need to tell them is what is right, what is wrong, and let them make a decision. And I think one thing that I don't know, I think I told this in one of the qualities, the quality of titiksha. You have to let the children make some mistakes. The kind of mistakes that they need to make, you can be careful. You can say, okay, they take the wrong. Sometimes you want them to take course A, they take course B. Let them do it. But those mistakes, they learn, they recover from it. They'll realize, okay, why I didn't do it. Or if they, one of the things that they do is whenever they fall, you help them get up and then fight the battle again, right? That emotional intelligence is probably the biggest thing that you can give your child, because the child will never go in his or her life will never go in a straight line. There's always be issues. There are some children whom we pamper them entirely during the 18 years of like till high school that they're with us. They've never seen any failure. Everything is taken care of for them because all the decisions are made, everything is made, and they've always stood out in the class, and we are very proud of them. We go tell every Indian friend we know that's what we do in parties actually on a weekend. Oh, my son did this, my son did that. And we are just extremely, because we have taken our ego all the way to the child. So whatever the child is doing is as if I'm doing it, right? A lot of people, I used to play a lot of cricket in my life, and a lot of parents play cricket through the kids. If they've not done very well, if the kid is doing well in tennis or cricket, it's as if that I'm playing it. But the problem is the kid, when he goes to college, right? I went to IIT, right? You go to IIT, every guy there is a high school superstar, right? And you go in there, and I know some friends of mine, and they all recovered towards the fourth year. First year, they were absolutely shocked. They had never got a grade below 90 in their life. And here's the guy sitting with, we give the collective grade, right? So the guy got a D. He could not believe it. It was depressed for a long time because we didn't prepare the child for the fact that everything will not go your way. There are times when things will not go your way. You just have to get up and go. That is the biggest skill you can teach your child, right? And that, how do you prepare for that role? You assume, you go in and say, this is a responsibility that's given to me by God. I need to fulfill this responsibility to the best of my ability. To answer your question, it's a very long-winded answer, but you have to discipline, because if there is something that the kid is not doing, which might hurt the kid over the long term, you have to discipline. That doesn't mean that you're absconding. You can't abscond your responsibilities and say, oh, I'm following Vedanta. That's not what we say. We say you live a dharmic life. So you live your karma yoga in a dharmic way, and that's how you move forward.
Okay.
I think one way I was listening to an example like to practice this, we have to practice this witness concept, right? I think that is when I think we'll try to
Correct.
Experience it. Like I think one simple, the example which I heard was like when we go for walking, actually, right? So we can imagine that like when we are walking, basically, you can clearly say that it is a combination of your body and mind. So your mind told, let's go for a walk. You just got up, your legs got up, your hands are moving and your legs are moving. There is nothing to do with apart from a body-mind coordination in a walking. But you are seeing that you are walking. So what is knowing that walking is a practice like you can do while you are doing walking. You can imagine, you can actually feel that for a side. I mean, I try to practice sometimes, but it is tough. So like we get diverted, but it is a very simple example that somebody gave, like I can recollect, like is we have to practice this witness concept because it is little vague, like to understand what is witness, like what is seeing and etc. But I think this example helps a little bit to experience how we are seeing what we are not.
No, it's a very good point. I think we talk about nididhyasanam all the time, right? So we say shravanam, mananam, nididhyasanam. That is learning, reflecting, meditation. When we think of meditation, we constantly think of meditation in a seat, and then we kind of think of a particular shloka and dhyanam and all that. That is one kind of meditation. You can do that for an hour or so. Swamiji used to say, you can actually meditate 24/7. How do you do that? Anything that you see in the world, right? First of all, you need to make sure that the body, mind, intellect, they are used as instruments. They should be under your control. You should not be under the control of the mind or under the control of the intellect. Then you've lost who you are, right? You are, I remember in that chart that I showed you, we are the Om on top. The body, mind, intellect is an instrument that we have. As long as we use those things as an instrument, we are very conscious. We call that as an alert living. We are very conscious of what we say, what we hear, what we think. But what happens is, a lot of times the situation gets, it kind of takes control, right? A lot of times what will happen is, and this has happened to me multiple times, that after my Vedanta class that I would have taught in Chinmaya Mission, those days we used to go to the ashram and come back. Now we're sitting here. And I would have been irritated with my son in the morning, and I'll tell myself that I should not get angry when I see him, when I come home. But sometimes you just don't have, you just see that guy and then just the anger just comes out, right? You just feel, or there is some guy in your office who's irritating you or something, and you try your best to say, I'm not going to lose my temper today. I'm not going to lose my temper. But you just go there and you sit in that surrounding, and then you don't know what happens to you. You just blurt out that stuff, or you become very angry. The more we can control that, the more we can control our body, mind, intellect to be very alert in how we transact with life. That actually gives you what Sriji was saying, is that you realize that you're not the body, mind, intellect, but you're something beyond that. You're something beyond those things. The other way to think about this all the time, even now, actually, you're doing nididhyasana. Let me explain. What I'm saying today, right now, the reason it becomes knowledge, it is not just hearing, but you listen to it and it becomes a knowledge, because what goes through your ears actually is touched by consciousness. So the consciousness is the power that converts what you see into something that is knowledge into your mind, into your eyes, because it gets reflected in the mind, and the mind is actually powered by consciousness. There's a lot of times when you go in, somebody would, especially it happens to husbands and wives very much, the wife would be saying something, the husband would not even acknowledge that she said it because he didn't pay attention. It just kind of came and he was not paying attention. The attention is what we say, the consciousness was not touching the data that is coming in from the ears. And then after an hour, my wife will ask me, I said this, do you agree with it? And I would have no clue, because I would be in my own world doing something else from work and coming through. The reason is, at that time, the consciousness is not acting on the data that came in, right? And so every moment in our life, consciousness is there. Without the consciousness, you can't read, you can't write, you can't even enjoy your food. That's why they say don't look at the TV and enjoy your food, because you're not paying attention to your food. You're just paying attention to what the TV is doing, right? The consciousness is not in the eating process. The consciousness is in what is on TV at that particular point of time. So just to kind of answer your question, what Sriji was saying, we can actually practice this nididhyasanam or this witness concept every minute of the day. And what it does to you over time is that, remember I said one of the most difficult things in life that we can do is how do we take the thing that I'm not the body, mind, intellect, because we are always thrust into that thing, right? Right from the childhood, we are said, oh, you are X, Y, Z, this is your name, you are born in this village, you're so tall, you're so fair, whatever that is. So the body is always thrust upon us as I. And breaking that relationship is the most difficult thing. Understanding Vedanta intellectually, it'll make a lot of sense after a while, because just like the logic that we pursued, we're going to pursue logic throughout the book, and you yourself will come to a conclusion that what the Vedanta is saying is true. So your intellect will understand that what Vedanta is true, what is saying is true. There is something called Atma, which kind of still is available, or it leaves the body, we die. You understand all that because intellectually you've seen it, because the body doesn't change. Within a minute, somebody has died, the body becomes inert, right? Where the problem comes in is the mind does not accept it. The mind is an emotional creature. The buddhi is an intellectual creature. Intellect, we can quickly understand the logic and we make it. The mind does not understand what the knowledge that the buddhi is created. And that requires a lot of work. Mind is nothing but, as we talked about, it is a culmination of all the samskaras that we have done in the past life. It's a creature of habit, right? The more we do one particular thing, we kind of get entrenched in one particular way, right? In fact, it's true. I'm sure you might have done it in India or whatever. Even animals, that's how you train the animals, right? You do one repeated behavior on a regular basis, the animal begins to understand that. Like, for example, in India, you do annadanam to crows, right? And a lot of families that do it. In my family, they used to do it. If you give the food, let's say between 9 and 10 every day, or no, between 12 and 1 every day, because that's when you have lunch, you will see a crow will be around that place after the 7th or the 8th day, because the crow realizes that at this time of the day, I'll get food. So mind is nothing. Abhyasena kaunteya. That's what in Gita, Lord Krishna says. You learn this thing by constantly practicing it, right? And so what is nididhyasanam and what Sriji was saying? We need to assume that we are the supreme being and let mind experience that thought, right? The mind is right now saying, I'm the body. But in the meditation seat or in the nididhyasana, the way we do in the transactional life, we need to train the mind that you're not the body. You're something above the body, mind, intellect concept. And that's how this knowledge will gain conviction. I can see on all your faces, oh, you think there is something true, but you're not convinced. It is still humbug to you, most of us, even me included. So don't tell me, I'm not going to say that I'm totally convinced either, but maybe I'm a little bit further along because I've done this for a little longer period of time. But to gain conviction, you have to do the reflection, and then you have to do this nididhyasana. You have to get the mind to condition in that regard.
So going back to Srigaru's concept, so when you say, your mind say, okay, let us get up and go walk. Once our body starts walking or whatever doing, whatever mind says, after that, Srigaru is saying like there is no coordination between mind and the action of the body, or
No.
the Atma is looking.
There is only coordination of mind, body going on when you're walking, but you are still able to see that you're walking. Something is experiencing that you are moving and you are doing walking. Mm-hmm. Apart from body and the idea that you had in mind that made you go to walk, you are able to see that something is walking. Like your body is moving, your arms are moving, your legs are moving, and you are able to see that your body is doing that action. And the reason for doing that action was that idea which came into mind, which intellect approved. Yes, it's good for walking, let's go. All these things happen. That's why you are walking. But
so there is coordination.
But what is it is all coordination of those three things. And we know that those three things are not me. But we are knowing all this process throughout. What is that knowing factor is what we are, is basically how we can practice this. But it is really enjoyable actually sometimes really to say that, like even like the fact that this was explained and it was tried to experience, it is really like, yes, it is what it is happening. You'll, if you understand that, like it really is a coordination of these three things, and you know clearly that these three are not you. So really, I mean, that's a vague feeling that you get, that it is, yes, there is something which is seen, right? Like that
I
is.
agree. I think the more you practice this, you can be in excruciating pain, but still there is something inside. You are still feeling a little happy. I experience it, sometimes. We are all human, everybody, body is body, no matter how hard you try. But you can be in the worst possible situation, but inside there is some happiness going on. That happens.
No, you look at some great Mahatmas like Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. He had a throat cancer for practically all his life, right? But he was able to isolate that and say that the throat cancer is with the body, but not with me. I'm beyond the body, right? But again, he was a very elevated soul. We are not in that category, but I'm just trying to say that the reason this is important is that once we are able to dissociate ourselves from the body, mind, intellect concept, whatever happens to that thing does not affect you, right? If the body, like you fall sick and you have cold, or we actually in Indian language, we say, my body is not well. We don't say I'm not well, right? We say my mind is not feeling well. Something is happening to my mind. We don't say that I am, because it's in English that we say everything is I. But in the Indian language, at least in Tamil that I speak at home, we'll say odambu sarila, that is the body is not well. Or we'll say manasu sarila. So my mind is not well. We in our culture, we are already dissociating ourselves that the body, mind, intellect is an instrument that I control. Like what Sriji was saying. Body, mind is something that I control. And when you're walking, you see that control because you are seeing, I ask this body and mind to walk and they're doing the walking and I'm enjoying it. Right? It's like, these are the tools that I have and I'm able to control the tool and they're listening to what I'm saying. Instead of the other way around, the mind gets very angry or something and then you get angry too and you reflect it on everyone else. Then the mind is controlling you. Right? Instead of the other way around, you should be controlling the mind. Like, for example, I'm sure every day, every time this happens, right? When it's around 7:45, if you're watching a great show or you're watching something on TV, your mind is saying, oh, today I'll miss it. There'll be a recording. I'll watch it later or something, right? And then you have to get the mind to kind of agree and say, no, I need to take part in the class, right? So that means the mind is under your control. If it's the other way around, where the mind kind of influences you, actually today there's Monday Night Football. If people who are football crazy might be interested in watching the game, right? So that's the difference. That's what Sriji was trying to say, that you need to have the body, mind, intellect under your control. That is what is called alert living. You need to see, another way to do this is that if at any point during your day, you know for a fact that I shouldn't have said this, I should not have done this, right? I should not have gone there. That tells you that the body, mind, intellect took control over you. You are not able to persuade your body, mind, intellect to do what you want them to do, but instead they influenced you, right? Yeah. So the more every day, at the end of the day, when we go to bed, we have less and less instances where we are a little bit ashamed of what happened. That itself is alert living. That you made sure that you didn't get angry at somebody because something else happened. You were able to, the anger should be, a lot of times this is what happens, right? We are angry at somebody else in the office and we come home and we blast everybody that we see because we take that anger out on someone else, right? And then we say, oh, I shouldn't have said this. I was already agitated because this guy ill-treated me or whatever. If we can parcel that life, we can get the mind to not do that. That's a good first step.
Yep, I agree. Yes.
All right.
So, sir, one question I have. So is it true then to say that even thinking ill about somebody or something is consciously done, and then even though you are not committed it, it is not it is affecting your karma, right?
It does affect it. It leaves an imprint on you, right? Like if you have done that thought will leave an impression. You think that, okay, nothing has happened, but in the subconscious level, that imprint will be there.
So even the thoughts are not exercised. You have already committed a sin, correct?
You committed a sin. The sin sometimes might not yield the negative result right away. It might be doing it at some other time. But ideally, we should not even think of that. See, the way I look at it is when somebody really does harm to me, I just say that, okay, it's my karma that I came across you, but God will take care of you, rather than me thinking anything negative about him, right? And that way, not that I'm a devata or whatever, I also get angry and I feel upset about it, but rather than brooding over it, I just say, okay, you have done this thing, you will pay the price for it at some point or the other, and just kind of move on.
Okay.
Right. In fact, the other day I was listening to Ramayana. There is a Ramakrishnananda who's there, who is actually a Swamiji in Nagapattinam in Tamil Nadu, and he's doing a phenomenal job. We actually are looking at Ramayana shloka by shloka. So we take the Valmiki Ramayana, we take shloka by shloka and read it the Sanskrit, and then he explains it. And the reason I bring that up is Rama, right? Lord Rama, the previous night, Dasharatha had told Lord Rama that you're going to get Yuva Pattabhishekam, right? You're going to be the Yuvaraj for this king. And then Dasharatha, that evening, after all the activities done, he's told all his people, this has to happen the next morning. Okay, that's the plan. He tells everybody to make the arrangements. He tells the sage Vashishta, his charioteer, all these things that need to be done. And then he goes to retire in the night. It's probably late at night. And he goes to Kaikeyi's palace, right? And in Kaikeyi's palace, obviously the whole world has changed because Kaikeyi has been influenced by mantra, and she tells him to take the 2 boon, and basically with the first boon, give the kingdom to Bharata, and then send this guy 14 years to the Vanavasa. And so Rama goes the next morning to, the charioteer comes to Rama's palace. They're all in different palaces. And the charioteer says, Dasharatha wants to see you. So Rama just says, okay, he wants to see me. He goes to the Kaikeyi's palace. And then Dasharatha is so shaken that he's lying down. It's Kaikeyi who answers on behalf of Dasharatha and gives these 2 boons. And then Rama comes back to Kaushalya, and then he's explaining to her what happened. And Kaushalya is obviously very angry. She's saying, just like your dad is saying this, I'm also part of you. So because the way Rama defines it is that I want to prove that my father is never telling a lie. Like I want to that is the reason he actually goes to the Vanavasam. My father has said this, I have to keep up his word, right? And then Lakshmana is also sitting on the other side, and you know how he's a younger guy full of hormones. He's out saying, I'm going to kill everybody. I'm going to just destroy Ayodhya. I'm going to make sure everybody comes to you. The reason I bring all this thing up is that Rama actually explains to Lakshmana that what I'm enjoying here is destiny. Destiny is the result of prior karma that I've done. That is why a father who loved me till last night has suddenly changed against me. And I have done this karma in my prior life, so I have to face the result. And that is very powerful. The reason I bring it up is it's a very scientific way of looking at our life, which is there only in Vedanta, is that what you inherit in this world is because of all the karmas that you've done in the past. Just like when you plant multiple seeds in a ground, not all of them grow up right away. Some actually germinate the next day, some germinate a week later, some germinate a month later, right? Similarly, the karmas that you do today, not all of them will give you the result today. You'll think that it is not giving you a result, but it will give you the result. If you committed a sin, you will face the consequences of it at some other point of time. We will discuss this whole thing about destiny and self-effort and all that at some other time, because that's another big topic. I don't want to get involved in it right now because there's a lot of misconception on that particular thing. But the reason I wanted to bring up destiny is this question of karma phala, right? Whatever karma you do, this is the law of karma that you will face the consequences. Nobody else will face the consequences. You will face it. Your children will not face it. Your wife will not face it. You will face the consequences of karma. So that is something that we need to remember. And in this journey to spiritual growth, Adi Shankaracharya says, you have to do it yourself. Even if you incur debt in your life, your children can repay the debt. But in this spiritual path, your wife cannot do the spiritual yearning for you. You have to do it yourself. So it's an individual journey that we have to be on our own to move forward in this thing. Sorry, I always get caught up and we didn't even progress in the class today, but you guys asked me a lot of questions. If you ask me a question, this is what happens to you.
It's interesting.
Anything else? Any other questions? Okay, if not, we should at least try to go into the koshas, pancha koshas. So we did the 3 shariras, we did the 3 avasthas. Now there are pancha koshas, right? And so let's go to that. I think it's right after the shariras, avasthas. So let's read what it is. Yeah, pancha kosha is page number 42. So we'll just read it's 848, so we might not be able to get to one of them, but we'll just see what they are, right? So maybe Ushaji, you can read verse 7, it's page 43.
Panchakosha ke
Panchakosha ke
Panchakosha ke
Annamaya,
Annamaya,
Pranamaya,
Pranamaya,
Manomaya,
Manomaya,
Vijnanamaya,
Vijnanamaya,
Jnanamaya,
Anandamaya cha iti.
Anandamaya cha iti.
Let me just explain the concept here. We'll get to each one of them in a lot more detail. The 3 shariras that we have, that is Stula, Shukshma, and Karana Sharira, have been broken into 5 koshas. We have to get beyond each of these koshas and realize that Atma is covered by these koshas, and we have to leave our identification with each of the koshas. Okay, and so one reason the Swamiji says is sometimes, remember, if you have very, very tall steps, we normally put a mini step to get the child to kind of climb the steps, right? The child cannot climb a tall step, but you put a small stool, you can go to the stool and then go up there. So in the journey to go from Stula Sharira to Atma, it's quite a tall order. You have to go through 3 big steps of Stula Sharira, Sukshma Sharira, and Karana Sharira. So another way of presenting the same thing is that breaking the 3 into 5. So we have Annamaya Kosha, Pranamaya Kosha, Manomaya Kosha, Vijnanamaya Kosha, and Anandamaya Kosha. Now, Kosha means something that covers the object. Okay, so the best example is when you have sword and you have the sheath on top of it that covers the sword, right? So when you touch that sword, your hand will not get cut because it covers it. Now, the question that you might ask is that normally something that covers an object is bigger than the object, right? So if you want to cover your body, you should be bigger than the object. And we have said Atma there is nothing bigger than the Atma. It is prevalent everywhere. So what could be bigger than the Atma? So that could be a question that I'm sure all of you had. If you didn't have, but I'm just going to give you the question anyway. The sheath here or the kosha here is not meant that way. What the kosha signifies is that just like the kosha covers the real sword internally, because it takes the identification from the sword and you actually look at the cover, right? The cover is normally painted or whatever. So the identification removes our identification from the sword into the kosha. Similarly, each of these koshas, because of our ignorance, remove our identification from the real I and get our I to be mixed with any one of the koshas. Okay, that's why we call it a kosha. So each of these things cover the real I. So when the ego, when the real I that we start thinking that I'm Annamaya Kosha, what it is doing is covering the real I. Like, for example, I'll give you this example, it'll make it a little clearer. We go to the movies, right? And sometimes we go pretty early in the movie, you see the white screen, right? And once the movie starts, for 3 hours, you're actually watching the screen. But do you ever think that you're watching the screen? It's a bunch of lights going on the screen. Whether you've lost the identification with the screen and you're kind of completely immersed in the movie, right? So the movie is like a kosha. It kind of covers the screen, right? Maybe I'm aging myself. Like IIT, we used to have this late Sunday night movies, and we had a theater where we just a piece of cloth, and sometimes when it rains, the cloth will go away. There goes the movie. The projector will be running, but you will not be able to see the movie because there is no screen, right? So that's the way this koshas are. The koshas actually take our identification from the real I and puts the identification in any one of these koshas. That's why they're called koshas. So what we have to do is we have to do the vichara and slowly but surely move our attention, take step by step and move away from, most of us remain in Annamaya Kosha because Annamaya Kosha is the Sthula Sharira, right? So that's kind of where our attention is fully. We need to slowly move from there into Pranamaya Kosha, into Manomaya Kosha, into Vijnanamaya Kosha, Anandamaya Kosha, and then go beyond that. And that whole process is called meditation. So that is what the koshas are, because the steps in the koshas are a little smaller than the steps in the shariras. The sharira steps are 3 and they're bigger in scope and size. So it's a difficult journey, whereas this one is a little bit easier. So in the last 5 minutes, let's read this thing, the introduction to 5 sheets. We'll get into this a little bit more. Maybe whom I pick, maybe Rupaji, you can just read if you have the page 43.
Certainly, sir. We can now imagine the subtlest sheath closet.
One step above, the term kosha, right below the heading of the chapter.
Okay.
Right above the shloka, you have a paragraph. Did you see that? The term kosha means
Yeah, the term, right. The term kosha means that which covers, that is a sheath. The main significance of the term is that it covers the true self that we are. The arrangement of the 5 sheets from the Grasser Subtle is a thought concept to illustrate the makeup of the numerous parts of the human being. It does not literally mean that each subsequent sheet is within the previous and that within the most subtle sheet lies the self like a precious jewel. No, that's not the actual reality. But as a concept, the idea of sheets within each other does very well to illustrate the 3 main relationships between the sheets. Number 1, the grosser sheet is always dependent upon the subtler. The latter, subtler, always pervades the former. The latter also controls the former.
This is very important. I think as you go into from the Annamaya Kosha down there, the koshas below are subtler than the kosha above. The kosha above is the gross kosha. And they also control, like for example, how you feel, how your prana affects your body, right? A lot of times you have gas trouble or you're constipated. It affects your face. It affects how you look. Or if Manomaya Kosha, if your mind is not in good shape, you're upset, it affects your overall body. So the 3 koshas below Annamaya Kosha actually control that. And the last thing which he hasn't said here that we discuss is that each of these koshas, as you go from top to the bottom, the bottom one is the closest to the Atma. So Annamaya Kosha is the farthest away from the Atma. Anandamaya Kosha is the closest to the Atma. So if you can kind of get over that process, so Annamaya Kosha is the closest to the Atma. But it is important to understand that every kosha below actually is subtler, and it also controls the koshas that are above. And this is something that we see in our day-to-day life. So maybe Rupaji, just follow the other two paragraphs and we'll stop after that.
Okay. We can now imagine the subtlest sheath closest to the self pictorially. We remember that the self is all pervading. Everything is equally close to it. So this is only illustrating the smile of sheaths, simile of sheaths. The Anandamaya sheath would be the closest to the self in subtlety. Then comes the Vijnanamaya, Manomaya, and Pranamaya sheaths. These last three are what form the subtle body studied earlier. So within the subtle body, there are three tiers of subtlety. The intellect being the most subtle, then the mind, and then the pranas. Finally, we have the gross body on the outside of the Pranamaya sheath.
Yeah, I forgot to tell you this. So the 5 are split, and the 3 shariras are split into 5. So the Annamaya kosha is nothing but your gross body. So that's like 1-to-1. And then Anandamaya kosha is nothing but your Karana sharira. So the top 2 and the top and bottom are taken. Sukshma sharira is the middle 3 layers. So Manomaya, Vijnanamaya, and Pranamaya, those 3 koshas are called the Sukshma sharira. So that's how the classification takes place. I didn't spend time on it, but you already read through it and you probably understand.
The food sheath, right? Annamaya. So normally food, we have some meaning, food to live or whatever, something that we need. So why are we, that sheath is called related to food. What is the reason?
No, because I think the gross body is made up of what you eat. The gross portion of the food is what is converted. So as you've seen, if you eat more, you become fat, right? So there's a direct 1-to-1 translation of what you eat and how your gross body looks like. So what we say is that, now, obviously, the gross body is made up of the components of the food that you eat. Like, for example, the South Indians eat sambar and rice. Their gross body is not made up of sambar. It's made up of sambar rice, but it is converted into an entity, right? Whereas the North Indians eat chapati. So the gross body is not made up of chapati. It is converted into the ingredients, and that is converted into the subtle body. The subtle body is made up of the food that you eat. So that's why it's called Annamaya kosha.
Okay.
It gets converted into skeleton, blood, and the 5 different things. Your majja, there is bone marrow, bone, muscle, skin, and blood. So it gets converted. So we have seen that, right? If you take a food that is lacking in iron, then your hemoglobin count is low, right? Your blood is not strong enough. So it is it's something that we see from real life. The quality of the food that we eat derives the quality of the body that you have. Like Balaji Garu constantly tells us, right, in a yoga class, what you should eat and what you should not eat. So this is where it comes from.
Okay.
Yeah, let's finish those 3 paragraphs. It's almost 9, but we'll.
Okay, like a scabbard covering a sword, the grosser sheath covers us as subtler. As a sheath takes the general form of what it covers, this simile appropriately expresses the actual situation where each sheath apparently takes the quality of what it covers. This gives each sheath an independent identity, and identity always produces an ego sense. Thus, an I am is attached to each of the 5 sheaths. This identity deceptively hides our true identity, which is the self.
Actually, this is very important because most of us, we identify ourselves with our Annamaya kosha, right? Because we look at ourselves and we look at our forms and all that. But there are a lot of people who identify with their thoughts, right? I said so, right? They just think that their thoughts define what's happening. So they're identified more with the Vijnanamaya kosha, right? So depending on how you identify yourself, like you put more emphasis on your capability, your ego is tied in that kosha. But for 95% of the time, it is the Stula Sharira that we identify ourselves. We look at the mirror every day, and that's how we identify. But we can identify with other, like for example, people who are very yogic breaths and all that kind of stuff. They pride themselves in the pranamaya kosha, right? They can hold on to the breath for a very long period of time, or they can do X amount of pranayama or whatever. So you can actually take each of the koshas and you can put a false I on top of it, which is why the guru is saying none of these I's that you identify with is the real I. But we do that on a day-to-day basis. I think we'll stop there. We'll come and continue this a little longer because I have talked too much and it's beyond 9 o'clock and I don't want to waste any extra time of yours. If there's any last questions, I don't mind answering. If not, we'll stop it right here.
Only
Okay.
one thing, sir.
Yeah,
In
go ahead.
Lalita, like going back to Taijasa, right?
Hmm.
In Lalita Sahasram, we say another name, Taijasatmika. So is there any reason like we call
Yeah,
Amavasya?
because she's providing light, right? Taijasa is nothing but somebody who provides an internal light to you. Similarly, Devi is providing the internal
Okay.
happiness or internal light for your overall life. We will get to Shakti and Shiva or Maya very soon.
Oh.
You will get to the Shaktis very quickly, very, very quickly.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, so we'll stop there and let's conclude the class. Om Purnamadam Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vishishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Sri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om. All of you have a great week and we'll catch up again next Monday. Thanks again for coming to the class. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Hari Om.